Begin the current daf, Masechta Nazir Daf Lamed Beis, begin 12 lines up from the bottom of the Lamed Alpha Beis, where we continue the halacha of the next Mishnah, which continues on a related vein from the previous Mishnah, which we opened up this parak Beis Shammai with the Machlekes Beis Shammai regarding Hekdesh B'Tois, and Tosfos explained that the reason why we introduced Hekdesh, what does have to do with Masechtas Nazir, was because of this Mishnah. Beis Hillel is going to bring in that Machlekes that they had and says, you agree with us over here, why are you disagreeing with us over there? Today's daf. Some discussing today's daf are an interesting case. If someone would take a ned of Naziris, he comes to the Chacham and va'asra, which we'll see exactly what does that mean, but basically he tells him that what he had said was a valid neder. So halach is that moina mishosha nada. He counts from the time that he took the neder, which we'll see exactly what does that mean, because that relates to the question about misha nadav aval nizirusai. Someone took a neder and he was violating his naziris. The question is, when he comes to the chachamim, he tries to get out of it, and they say, no, you got to keep it. Does he have to recount the days he did not keep or not? Nishla chacham ve'tirai, and what happens if he comes to the chacham and his matter? What happens to those kabbanis is that they all go, like we said, teitze v'tira ba'eda, goes and grazes in the flock. The halacha of karel l'tshia asira asiri tshi le'echad asa asira is a unique halacha by ma'aseh behema, where if, let's say, the 10th animal is supposed to be ma'aseh behema, you're supposed to call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and but the 9th one you called it 10, the 10th one you called it 9, and the 11th one you called it 10, the halacha is actually shumah kudosh. All three of them are actually going to be having the kedushas ma'aseh behema. The halacha of mishnad ben nazir, if someone took a neder of Nazir as well, lehevias behemta, he went to bring his animal, he finds that stolen. So we're going to see that there's a difference if he took the neder before it was stolen or after it was stolen, which relates to this halacha of Peschim B'Noilin, which is that can you open up something that was going to develop later on, like the Churban Beis Hamikdash, where that's something that you cannot be Pesach B'Charata, because it's not something that was available. Charata is a Pesach that at the time you took that, had you known that, but that's not something that you expect, only develop later on, as Tosfos says on the word, if it's shchiach, so that wouldn't be a valid Pesach for your neder. So we begin the current daf, the Lamed Alpha Beis, 12 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, we continue with halacha the next Mishnah. Misha nod ben nazir. Someone take a neder of Naziris. V'nishal lo chacham. The Tosfos here is on Amud Aleph. And he goes to ask the chacham. So in other words, you have a nazir, took his neder of Naziris. Now there's some words that are not really explained in the Mishnah, but Tosfos explains. And the guy violates and he drank wine during his Naziris. Now, he realizes he's not doing a good job over here. He comes to the Chacham to be mat his neder. Because as Tosfos explains, even according to Beis Shammai, they hold that there's no sheila by hekdesh, which also means there's no sheila by Naziris, as we said in Daf Testament Aleph, that according to Beis Shammai, you can't undo. So what are you coming to the Chacham for? So Tosfos explains, even so, according to Beis Shammai, you have to make your Kabbalah of Naziris with a good and significant wording that's fit to be Mekabel Naziris. But there are many words or slang which is not even a Kabbalah. So even Beis Shammai would agree that if let's say you took your Kabbalahs and Naziris with an inferior, flawed language, it's not a neder. So he comes to the Chacham and say, oh, Rabbi, when I was Mekabel Naziris, you know, somehow when you say the question, you say it in a way like, I'm hoping he's going to say, like, he matter it for you. Say, I didn't really say it. When I said it, I said in this wording, so I'm not sure. Was it a Kabbalah? Was it not? I really was not thinking. And the Rav tells you, va'asrei, says the words of the Mishnah. And he says, it's aser. In other words, it was a lashon of Kabbalah. And that means to say you were a nazir from the beginning, and you were violating when you were drinking wine. So what's the halacha? Says the Mishnah, moina misha shenadar. You have to count from the moment you took the neder of Naziris, meaning, and all the days that you were violating, they will be counting forward towards your days of Naziris. So, as Tosfos explains, what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? We're not going to penalize him to count over the days that he already counted that he was violating his Naziris. Because the Tosfos explains, obviously he's talking about that he violated, because if not, of course he's going to count from when he took his neder of Naziris. They're saying it's a good Kabbalah, and yeah, you were a Nazir. So obviously, the pashtas of the Mishnah sounds like that moin mishosha nadar, you're going to be counting from the time you took the neder, even for the days that you violated, are going to be counting towards the days of Naziris. Which, the reason why we're saying the words asrei, they're not really prohibiting with anything. It's just Tosfos explains, because the next case of the Mishnah is hitirai. They say, don't worry, it wasn't a lashon Kabbalah, you weren't a Nazir at all. So the Reish says, v'asra, even though they're not asking him anything, they're just saying, yeah, it was a good Kabbalah of Naziris, you were a Nazir. So you have to count it. We're going to see in the Gemara a question, but we're not going to penalize you. Fine, you count from the moment that you took a neder, because with the exception of becoming Tamal Amaze, which says Vayam Rishon Yiplu, if you violate the halacha of your Naziris, if you go to Tamal Amaze, then you got to start over. But if you drink wine, if you do any one of the other ones, you don't have to start over your Naziris. So this guy was drinking wine. Okay, you were doing Isurim, you get Malchus, whatever this and that, but you don't have to start over your Naziris. You count Mishah Shanada. Okay, that's the Reisha. But what happens if, let's say, Nisha l'chacham v'tirai, let's say he goes to the Chacham, and he's mattered for him. In other words, as Tais explains here in Amud Beis, that he tells him, oh, the Kabbalah that you did was nothing. You didn't take a neder in a good wording to become Naziris. Comes out, the Naziris didn't take effect even for one moment. Okay, and this relates to a theme that we've had a few times already in the previous parak. So if he had an animal that already separated for Naziris before he came to the Rav, he resigned himself, I'm a Nazir, he had this animal separated. Now it turns out he was never Nazir in the first place. So now the animal could go out and graze in the flock with all those other animals because they're total chulin, because Naziris didn't take effect in it, because there's not even, as Toys explains, hektish tos, meaning even Beishami would agree that this animal is total chulin. Because when did we have in the previous Mishnah, we spoke about a black ox that's going to come out first, is going to be hektish, and out comes a white one. So we said over there, Beishami holds the white one's going to be hektish. So according to the one that says in the Gemara, the reason is because he's not concerned, and he wants that hektish should take effect even on the white one. He mentioned the black one. That was a mistake because he thought the black one's going to come out first. So that's why Beishami holds, hektish is going to be hektish. But over here, the Naziris didn't take effect in the beginning at all. And the animal was only separated only for the purpose of Naziris. And there's no Naziris, so there's no hektish. As Tais explained, this is less than hektish Tais. It was based on your Naziris, and there's no Naziris. So therefore, even Beisham would agree that Teitze b'tereh be'eda, because you totally uprooted the neder totally because you said it should be for the kabbanis of my Naziris, which you didn't take any Naziris. So Teitze says it's like a guy who's not chayiv, but he thinks he's chayiv chatas, and he says, this animal should be for my chatas. And he finds out, but you didn't do a chatas. So he hasn't said anything, even according to Beisham. So therefore, this halacha is according to everyone. And the reason why we have to point that out according to everyone is because that's the point of the Mishnah. That's why I bring it. The Mishnah continues and says, wait a second. Don't you agree to this case? It's a mistake in hektish. The guy was makdish his karbanis for his naziris, but it was a mistake. He thought he was a nazir, whatever, so it was erroneous. And still you hold that, it goes out to graze and develops, to the flock until it develops a blemish. So obviously that hektish tos is not hektish. Because you see over here that you agree teitzer b'teira be'eda. So just like you agree over here, agree to us by the previous Mishnah, by the black ox, that you disagree with us over there, and you say, no, it's good, the white one is going to be hektish. So Tyson points out, Beishamai could have responded that here it's less than hektish tois, as we just explained before. We mentioned that Beishamai would agree because it's not even hektish tois. Hektish tois that, it makes sense that maybe he wanted it, but he made a mistake in calculating, he thought it was going to be black, it was going to be white. Here, it was all based on the faulty premise, it wasn't even hektish tois. But Beishamai wasn't concerned to respond the true difference between the cases, and rather Beishamai responded according to Beis Hill's premise. Beis Hill was comparing the cases, and Beis Hill was trying to prove to Beishamai, you see hektish toes is lav hektish. So that Beishamai responded according to the words of Beis Hill from Ma'aser Behema, where you see that even though it is a toos that hektish, it is going to take effect. Now, Taisus says it's a little bit difficult because why is it different than a woman that her husband was made for her neder? The Gemara had said in the Chavdal Amud Aleph that if it was her animals, we said, and then her husband's mefer, she was mafresh her karbanis. Her husband says, no, over my dead body, you're not going to be a nazir, I'm mefer. But she already has the animals, she already has the chattas and the oil and shalom. What do you do? So he said the chattas is tamas, left to die. What do you mean? But why do we say over here that it's yitzah be'eder, that the karbanis that he had separated go out to the flock? So it says there's two approaches. First of all, by the husband, you could say make his guys. He cuts it off from that point onward. But whatever she was mafresh as a chat, it was a chattas, so it has to be left to die. Or it says even if you say the husband is ikrit l'mafreya, but the Gemara on Daf Chav Beis had explained that teaching is going like a belazar kapper. But you're right, according to the Rabbanan, it would go out to chulin. And even according to Rabbi Lazar says Taisis, it's still not, you could say that's not dissimilar. It's not the same thing. Because over there, the neder took effect for one moment when you didn't have the charata and the toys yet. Meaning, the husband is oikel mafreya. But until he did that, it did take effect. So the epis is dog givein, something was here. Like this, you could see that there was once someone who wrote something on the program, but it's like not here anymore. But over here, it never took effect even for one moment. It was never here. It was never, your Kabbalah was never Kabbalah. You go to the Rabbi, he says, you never took a Naziris. So therefore, that's why it's not difficult from the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Dalet. But be that as it may, Beis Hillel is asking Misham, he says, what are you talking about? Here you agree, it's hektish, but you say it's not hektish. So why B'shar Shacha you guys disagreeing with us? Why did you say it's going to be hektish, the white one? So Misham says, wait a second, you really think that hektish b'tois lav hektish? Don't you agree to me to the following case? Mimishan ta. Again, it's the mistake, it's the hektish b'tois. Someone made a mistake. And as Ma'aseh Behema is, you take all the new animals that were born to the flock that year, you put them in the pen, and they come out one by one. And you're going 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you're going. Now he calls the ninth one Asiri. He miscounts. He calls the ninth one by 10. And Lasiri Chi calls the 10th one number 9. Well, Achad Asa Asiri calls the 11th one number 10. The halacha is Shehu Mekudesh. That, as Taisis Girsa is, Shashloshta Mekudashim. All three animals are going to be holy, are going to be hektish, because it takes effect with your mistake. And from here you learn out that hektish b'tois is going to take effect. Now the Ma'aseh Torah says, what's the source that all three are kodesh that we're learning out from here? So that's how the Gemara explains in the last parak in B'chayris, Daf Chasamach and Beis. The pasuk says, "V'chol ma'aser baka b'tzayin." What does it mean, "V'chol ma'aser baka b'tzayin"? Whatever is 10, meaning either it's be'etzim the 10, or you called it number 10. But number 8, number 12, then not, because ma'aser is only mekadesh, only the number that's near it. But Taisus points out actually that this is not the primary reasoning of Beis Shammai, because as Beis Hillel is about to reject it, the reason Beis Shammai is, as the Gemara explained on Daf Lamed Alpha and Aleph, that you could say that you learn out Tchilas Kodesh, Mesaif Kodesh, where Temura we know takes effect b'tois, that we have Yiyeh l'Rabbis Shoigi Kamezid. So that's really where it's from. But Beis Shammai just wanted a haka Beis Hillel, so they were coming and saying, what do you mean? I could show you hektish b'tois is hektish, because look at the halacha Ma'aseh Behema, where it's a mistake, and yet you see it's going to be kodesh. Which Beis Hillel says, no, Beis Shammai, you're missing the boat. Loi, hashevet kidshay, you think that the stick is what, sanctifying? In other words, it's not sanctified because of your mistake that you put the stick, which they used to do with a stick, and they had the red dye, and you're calling it Shem Ma'aseh. That's not what's making it, because it says, if the guy made a mistake, if he put the stick on number 8 or number 12, you think the guy did something, it's hektish b'tois, he by mistake called it number 10. No, it doesn't work. We know that. It's only 9 and 11. So what's the pshat? They're not based on the halach of hektish b'tois. The pasuk that sanctifies the 10th one, the pasuk is what's making the 9th number 11, because it's a gzeres hakosiv. It's not the one that's mekadeh, only the one that's near it, is because the Torah says, and you cannot learn that from over there to other cases of hektish. And therefore Beis Hillel says you don't see a raya from here of hektish b'tois have hektish. That's yeah, that meaning that the only mistake of 10 is if you call 9th or the 11th one number 10. So that's what Beis Hillel proves. It's not because it's hektish b'tois. If it's hektish b'tois, then number 8 and number 12 should also. If you made a mistake, you called 8 number 10. It should also become a Ma'aseh Behema. It's gemachtatus, hektish b'tois. We know that it doesn't work. That's the Messiah. It only worked on number 9 and 11 because it's gzeis hakasim. So don't prove to me because hektish b'tois, hektish b'tois. Then number 8 and number 10 should also work. So now the Gemara says, okay, Mani Masnitin, who's the Tana of our Mishnah? It seems like Loi Rabbi Yesi, B'loi Rabbana. Why? This is going back to the opening halach of our Mishnah of taking a neder of Naziris, and he comes to the Chacham, and the Chacham says, yeah, you know what, you and Nazir, all these past few weeks you were drinking wine, all that asti is going to cost you, but we'll count it from the day that you started your neder of Naziris. Our Mishnah seems to be not like either one of the following two Tanoim. Because the time you learn the Bryce that says, Misha Nada va'ava al Nazirusay. Someone took a neder, and he violated his Naziris. So again, these Taisisin are on the Daflam Gimel Amid Beis. on the bottom of the first column. Like we said, all the Taisis on the Gemaras, right? All the Mishnayos are on the right daf, but the Taisis, they put them all together in the back. So this is, if you're looking on Lama Gimel Beis, on the bottom of the first column. So, for example, let's say someone took a Kabbalah of a Nazir of 100 days. The guy was drinking Cabernet for 60 days, and he wants to bring his karbanos for his Naziris. So Allah is Einis Kakanai. So we don't go ahead and allow him to bring his karbanos of Naziris. Elamikin Meina Behen Isser, only if he counts prohibited, in other words, the 60 days, Kiyam Shanag Ben Heter, like the amount of days that he treated as permitted for 60 days. In other words, what the Tanakhama is saying is that you can't now, after your 100 days of Naziris, the first 100 days in office, and you were the first 60 days, you were, I don't know, out playing golf or something. You were drinking wine for those 60 days. Now that it's over, you can't just bring your karbanos. You got to make up those 60 days that you were drinking wine. You got to do over now. You got to add on another 60 days to make up for those days. That's the Tanakhama. Rabbi Yisemi says, no, it's enough 30 days, which Taisa brings in the Re, that he says it's enough if we penalize him 30 days, if let's say he took a net of 100 days, and he violated from those 100 days, we don't penalize him to be seiser everything that he was drinking wine all those days. Only 30 days. For that, we're going to say that that's where it depends on the Girsais how you read it, but we're going to say we'll count 70 days, but 30 days we won't count. So even though he was drinking wine of it, but according to Rabbi Yossi, we penalize him what's called a Nazir's Mo'etes. We're just going to penalize you a period of 30 days. Now, let's say you took a neder of 30 days and you drank wine and all of it, says Tais, of course, according to Rabbi Yossi, it would be says everything. If you drank wine 2 days, you'd have to count other days without drinking wine. But that's the Machlekes Tanakama and Rabbana and Rabbi Yossi. According to Tanakama, you have to make up all the days that you're drinking wine. According to Rabbi Yossi, no, only 30 days. But says the Gemara, so I don't understand. Either one of these cannot be the Tana Mishnah. Why? As the Gemara explains. If the Tana Mishnah Rabbanan, Kash Naziris, and the Girs is supposed to be the opposite of how it's written in our Gemara, the way Tosfos quotes. If it's Rabbanan, Kash Naziris Meruba. The difficulty is a large Naziris, meaning, Tosfos says, even a large Naziris, meaning, whether it's a large Naziris of 100 days and you drank wine in them, according to the Rabbanan, it's going to be Seiser everything. Or whether Naziris Moetis, like 30 days, and you drank wine, let's say 2 or 20 days or whatever it is, you would have to count that amount of days over again. The Mishnah sounds like that you count from when you took the neder. In other words, what that means to say is, even if you're going to say that some of the days that he took the neder is not going to be sized for everything, only 30 days, and the other 30 days is going to count for him, that might be like Rabbi Yossi, but according to Rabbanan, it definitely not, because how could you say Moedim Shoshanada? It sounds like we're going to count those days. According to Chacham, you never count those days. You got to count over every day that you're drinking wine. But even says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, even if it's like Rabbi Yossi, so maybe Nazir's Meruba would make sense because, okay, we don't make you do over the whole thing, and maybe that's what the Mishnah means when it says Moedim Shoshanada. I mean, you could count some of the days they took the neder, but according to Rabbi Yossi, you still have the difficulty, Kash Nazir's, and the Ger says Mu'etes. The difficulty is a small Naziris, because even according to Rabbi Yossi, when you take a Nazir of 30 days, and you drink any one of the days, you're going to be sized of the whole thing, because you're sized a period of 30 days. And the Mishnah sounds like that it's all going to count. So our Mishnah is not like either one of the Tanoim, not like the Rabbanan, and not like Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara, no, not difficult. You could say it actually like either one of them. How's that possible? So the Gemara explains. If you want to say like Rabbi Yossi, our Mishnah is specifically talking about Benaziris Meruba, by a large Naziris. Oh, okay. So Rabbi Yossi said that you're only going to be sized for 30 days. So therefore, what that means to say is that the 70 days are going to count towards his minyan, like in Naziris Moetis. So when he said that Moedim Shoshanada means from the time that you didn't mean all of it, but from the time that you took the neder, we're going to count from it. That's because we're talking about Naziris Meruba. But Kan Benaziris Moetes, Rabbi Yossi in the Bryce is talking about when he says it's going to demolish everything was by a minimum Naziris of 30 days, and you drink wine and the whole thing. Then it's going to be sized the whole thing. But you're right, Naziris Meruba, Rabbi Yossi agrees it's not going to be sized everything, and that's what Rabbi Yossi says. Daya, it's enough for 30 days. So again, it could be like Rabbi Yossi, Or, says the Gemara, how's that possible? Rabbanan, like the Mamash, the exact opposite of our Mishnah. No. Loitemi, you have to read it differently. Don't say Mishosh Nazar. Don't say that, we're going to count it from when you took your Nedam Naziris, and like as if you could count all those days you were drinking wine. No, Ela Kim Mishosh Nazar. No, say, like from when you took the Nedam Naziris. In other words, you have to count days of Isser, whatever is, let's say, those 60 days that you drank wine, or Naziris Moetes. You have to count those days over again. And that's not the wording the Mishnah means. Moedim Shoshanoda means you've got to count over that amount of days from when you started the neder and you were violating. Now that you're coming to count over again because you came in front of the Chachamim, you have to treat those days that you had drank wine those days. That's how you have to count over those days again. But most definitely, says Taisus, if let's say before he drank wine, he was counting days of Naziras, those days, even according to Rabbanan, you're not going to be sois those days because this drinking wine shtickle is only rabbinic. Biblically, it doesn't sois. It's not sois for anything. Only tumul ameis is vayom risham yiplu. So, but the days that you're drinking wine, that's where you have to count over. So again, you have to read it differently. And then, of course, the time of the Mishnah could be the Rabbanan because actually you're counting over those days. You're not counting from those days. Now the Mishnah continued and said, let's say nishal chacham v'tiru v'chulu. Let's say you asked the chachamim. And you come to them and they say, the Rebbe says, oh, what you took? That wasn't an Edom Naziris. You have all these nervin. You didn't do anything. It's gone through. You're done. So Teitza B'tirva the animal that you're mafresh, could go ahead and graze in the flock. Now, Amr Rabbi Yirmiyah, he just points out, he makes the following note. He says, Mid Beis Shammai nishbel the Beis Hillel. From the words of Beis Shammai, you could understand to the words of Beis Hillel. What do you mean? So he explains. Lav Rami Beis Shammai, didn't Beis Shammai say in our Mishnah that hektish b'tois have a hektish, meaning that we had said in the previous Mishnah that Beis Shammai with the black ox and the white ox, Beis Shammai says, yeah, even though it was a mistake, you meant to say black, you said, but it ends up being white, it's going to be hektish. But yet still in our Mishnah we see Kibin de Gloi Milsid Lav Shap and Nazir. Once we see that if you didn't take a Naziris at all, Teitze B'dirvei the Beis Shammai agrees that it goes out and into the graze and develop a blemish, because that's what we learned explicitly in our Mishnah. We learned that Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, don't you agree over here that it's hektish b'tois and Teitze B'dirvei? Because when he came in and he asked in front of the Chacham and they were mattered, it wasn't the Kabbalah at all. So therefore the Kabbalah that you mafresh for Naziris, we said are going to be chulin, like a guy who says, this is for my chatas, and hello, you never did a sin to be chayv chatas. So he said, Beis Shammai agrees that it's not going to be kodesh. Oh, so Rabbi Yirmiyah just wants to point out that the Beis Hillel nami. The Beis Hillel also, what? Although they say Temura b'tois have a Temura, meaning although Beis Hillel holds hektish b'tois lo have a hektish, but Lamaisa, what Beis Hillel agreed to, as we expounded, we already mentioned this on the previous daf, which brought in Gemara Temur Daf Yedzayin, everyone agrees that by Temura you have the word yeh that's l'rab b'shoigig amazing. Beis Hillel agrees with it that Temura b'shoigig is going to be Temura. Oh, so although they don't agree to hektish b'tois have a hektish, but Temura they do, but you can still make the parallel what you see from Beis Shammai. Oh, so therefore, Hanamili, when did we say this halacha is heicha de isalike hektish? When you have the primary hektish that's there, and the temuch is based off that, it just was betoyis, so then we're going to say it's going to take effect. But when the eker, when the primary hektish gets uprooted, is aker nami temura, then the temura also gets uprooted. That's exactly the same halacha, and therefore it's going to be teitzim with the hatemura le'eder. In other words, that for example, if you're makdash behema as a oila, and then you bring another animal, say this is a temura for this oila. But then what happens is you go to the Rebbe, you go to the Chacham, for the first one. And his mate says that's not an oila. So now the temucha is also going to go to Eider, because it's like as if you're saying that there should be a temucha on the behema that's chulin. Of course not going to become a temucha. That, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, is the same thing you see from Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says hektish instead of a hektish, but when we said that hektish was based on a faulty premise that's not there, you said that this should be a kabbalah for Nizir, it turns out you never knows in the first place. Shammai says it's not going to be hektish. That's the same thing that he's trying to draw a parallel for the temucha, which is based on this carbon. And this carbon was never an oila. So therefore there's not going to be temucha, even according to Beis Hillel agrees that temucha b'hektish b'tois would be a temucha. Now the Gemara goes back to halacha the Mishnah Amamar. Beis Shammai responded to Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel had said, hello, what are you talking about? We have this halacha of hoisel behem ufresh v'teitz. You agree, even though you say in the previous Mishnah hektish because of hektish, but here don't you agree that it's not going to be hektish? So how's it different than the previous Mishnah? So on that, Beis Shammai responded and said, wait a second, don't you agree? If you go the 9th one 10, and 10th one 9, and the 11th one 10, that all three are going to be hektish. Don't you see hektish b'tois have a hektish? Now, a related discussion to this halacha of meiser, Itma, we learned the following teaching. Meiser, Rav Nachman Amma, he says, to usai, his mistake, v'loy kavanasai, and not his intent. Meaning that if a guy deliberately called the ninth one number 10, it's not going to be Kodesh. This halacha that we're saying in the Mishnah that Bisham is quoting, we're still rejecting it as a raya, that if you call the ninth one 10, and the 11th one 10, and 10th one 9, all three are going to be Kodesh, that's only if you made a mistake, to usai. But like Kavanasa, if you deliberately intended to call the ninth one number 10, it's not going to have the halacha of Ma'aseh Behema. That's the opinion of Rav Nachman. Rav Chisda and Rabbi Nami, they say no. To usay v'kol shekin kavanasay. Your mistake, and for sure if you intended. Why did the Mishnah say mishata? Says that's just a chiddush, even though you made a mistake. But if you deliberately did it, then for sure it's going to have the halacha of Ma'aseh Behema. That's their machlokes. Now, Amalei Rav Nachman. So Rava says to the first mandamar of Nachman, Lidi daftamit, according to you that you say to usay v'loy kavanasay, this halacha was only said gzeis hakasim. Was only said that when he makes a mistake, not when he deliberately has a mind. So I have the following question for you. This is where it relates back to halacha b'mishnah. The ka'amri b'sham l'besil. This is b'sham said to Besil. Because again, b'sham Besil are having this whole machlokes regarding, hektish b'tois, is it hektish or not? So b'sham said Besil, wait a second, Besil. You're telling me hektish b'tois law of a hektish? Don't you agree to me? She l'kol l'chiyah asira be called the ninth one number 10. Ula asira she called the 10th one number 9. Ula achados asira called the 11th one number 10. Don't you agree shashashim ha'kudashan? All three are holy. You see hektish have a hektish. Now, V'ishtiku Beis Hill. Beis Hill was silent. Now, Taisa points out, not necessarily Beis Hill was silent, because they actually responded. They said it's Gzeis HaKasev. What the Gemara means to say is, Beis Hill was silent, that they didn't respond with a svara minei ubei, from the logic that Bisham is coming from. They just brought from the 12th one and the 8th one. But regarding the actual point of Bishamai, that they didn't respond to. The question is, Rava asked Rav Nachman, according to you, why didn't Beis Hill respond the following words? No, Mala Meiser, what are you talking about Meiser? Shekin in a Kodesh bekavana. You cannot make this sanctified deliberately with intent, like other hektish. So obviously it's a Gzeis HaKasev. In other words, according to you, why does Beis Hill go to number 8, number 12, and they have to prove from somewhere else, like some extrinsic proof, to show that it's not because hektish b'tois, it's a Gzeis HaKasev. Meinei ubei. What do you mean? According to you, this is not like a regular hektish. Regular hektish, you can be makdish, you bekavana doing it. Here it's not bekavana. Here it only works betos, only with a mistake. So obviously it's Gzeis HaKasev. So that's the question Rava asked on Rav Nachman. So Amar Rav Simi Barashi says that's not difficult. I'll tell you, the reason why that Beis Hill did not respond with that response to Beis Shammai is because, as some Girsois add on, which is evident from Taisis, that's by the Aleph of Yedim Kain, if that would be the case, then Leimru Lahoin. The problem is then Beis Shammai would say to Beis Hillel, what do you mean, the Kavachaimahu? Beis Shammai would say, that's not a good answer. To the contrary. Ma Meiser, then I would tell you like this. If by Meiser, She'ein a Kaddish, where it's not holy like Hektish to be holy, Bikavanam, with intent, and even so, it takes effect, Kaddish b'tois, it will be holy when you make a mistake. So Kavachaimer, Hektish, She'kaddish b'kavana, which that's how you makdish something when you're doing intently. Like Kolshkin, isn't it all the more so that it will be Kaddish b'tois? Fakert, Beis Shammai would have used it as a you come with a bat and I could use it against you. This is Beis Shammai would have used it against Beis Hill. So it's not a difficulty in Rav Nachman because Beis Shammai would have used it. But the Gemara does point out, V'lohi, it's not really true. Even Beis Shammai would have responded like that, it's not really correct. Because the hektish b'daita demagritali. Because hektish really depends on the consciousness of the owner, meaning as Tosfos is saying, this is all from the words of Rav Simi. In other words, this really wouldn't be a good kavachimer to cut down Beis Hill, because most definitely hektish is with the intent and the focus of the owner, because the Torah says ish asher yaktish as beisai, that means midas bekavana. So therefore, it's not true. Betois, it's not a hektish. Meister that it works betois is a gzeis hakasev, like Beis Hill responded in our Mishnah from number 8, number 12. But says Taisa, so it's not difficult in Rav Nachman. So why didn't Beis Hill respond Menei Ubei? Because you could say that Beis Hill picked one out of 2 reasons. And he didn't want to pick the reason of, because it's betois, but not bekavana, even though Rav Nachman's correct, because Beis Shammai would have misunderstood. Beis Shammai said, oh yeah, really? Kavachaimer. It works betois and not bekavana. So regular action works bekavana, but sure should work betois. which Rav Shloimy says is not really true. Beis Shammai would have gotten it wrong, but Beis Hillel, instead of responding to something that Beis Shammai would have gotten wrong, and then he has to have a whole conversation, he just told them number 8, number 12, which I'll prove to you is Gzeis HaKasav, but Al-Kabam, it's not difficult on Rav Nachman from our Mishnah. The next Mishnah, continuing on this halacha of a suffix Kabbalah, which that's what we spoke about in the previous Mishnah, which were like the guy who wasn't sure, did he take Kabbalah, did he say the right words, did he not say the right words? So here it comes with a similar type of a halacha. So Misha Nada ben Nazir, if someone takes a neder of Naziris, and he goes, okay, he finished his Naziris, he goes to the barn, he goes to bring his animal for his kabbanis. This was the animal that he was going to bring as his carbon. He finds it was stolen. So what does he do? He comes to the Rav. He says, Oi, I have charata. If I would have known that this animal is going to be stolen, I would never have taken neder. I don't have funds to go buy other kabbanis to go bring for my kabbanis. So what's the halacha? So the Rav strokes his beard. He says, okay. If before it was stolen, is when he took his neder of Naziris, although at the end it was stolen, but when he took the neder of Naziris, it wasn't stolen, halacha is a reason Nazir. He's going to be a Nazir. The Chacham cannot be matter through the Charata to say, oh, had I known that the animal was going to be stolen at the end, would you have taken such a neder as him? And he says, no, Rabbi, I would never have. No, the Rav cannot do that. Because that's what's known as Noilid, where it was stolen after he had done the Kabbalah of the neder. And the Mishnah teaches Mesech Nedam Daf Samach Amud Aleph, that those are cases that develop later on. You cannot go ahead and use it as a Pesach Harada. So to the next case, the Mishnah is going to bring the Churban Beis Hamikdash is also something that you only develop later on. Now, Tais has an interesting question. He says, if you're going to say, wait a second, anytime you make a Pesach, you tell him, did you have that in mind? Would you have taken such a neder? But that itself is Noilid, because that wasn't there at the time they took the neder, that Pesach, just like stolen. So Tais says, no. Tais says a very important distinction. He says, regarding things that are normal to happen later on, a person would entertain that at the time he's taking the neder. That is, when he took the neder, his intention was that if one of those things are going to happen, that he's not going to want to be able to fulfill his neder, and it's going to be void. As the Gemara says in Dam Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, let's say where it's very common that the heretics, they bother the rabbis, and he knows about it, and when that happens, it's like, I would never have done that had I known that would happen. But when something is stolen, or by the churban, that's something that's noilid, and Tais adds on the important words, that's leishchiach, it's not common. So therefore, a person would never have entertained during his neder to think, oh, maybe the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. And if he conclusively makes his neder in his heart that he's going to be a Nazir, even if his animal is going to be stolen, because he thinks it's not going to be stolen. It's not something that he thinks that, and it only develops later on. And that's where you can have an opening for a noilid such as that. Now, we continue to Amud Beis, but that's only if what's called im achelei nigneva behemtei Nazir. He took the neder of Nazir and was stolen later on, a few weeks later, then he's a Nazir. But in other words, if let's say when he took the neder, it was already stolen before and he just didn't know. And he finds he looks at the camera and he sees that, it was stolen a few weeks before. And in the Mekabel Naziris, and he says, had I known when I took my neder that was already stolen, I would never have taken neder of Naziris, then Einoi Nazir. Then he's not going to be a Nazir. In other words, it is a bona fide charata, and the Chacham is going to be matter for him because the Kabbalah itself was betois. Had he known that it was stolen, he would never have taken the neder. Is he glory Muslim afraid to reveal retroactively that was a neder betois? And it wasn't even taking effect even for one moment, because since he only took the neder on this animal, and he never had it, so it was a neder betois. And says Taisa, it seems that even Beis Shammai would agree in this case that he's not going to be a Nazir because it was never here. It's not like anything to take effect on. It was a total mistake from its inception. And says the Mishnah that actually Bezu Tois, this mistake of Noilid, Ta Nacham Hamadi. Nacham Hamadi made this mistake that he thought that you could make a Pesach with Noilid, even though it's not Shchiach, which Taisa explained that's really the difference between what's Noilid and what's not. Because the following story, what happened was, there were certain Nazarites, or whatever you call them, Nazirim, that came up from the Gullus to bring their Karbanis. And they found the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Some of them, Nachamadi said to them, look, guys, had you guys known, the Beis Hamikdash been destroyed, because again, they have to bring their Karbanis. They can't. Would you have taken Neder Nazir, and he wants to get them out of this situation? Would you have been Nazirim? Had we known, we never had done it. Now, as Taisa points out, this is Noilid. It's not Shchiach. At the time you took the neder, the Beis Hamikdash was still around. They didn't entertain to say that the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed. But he said, he knows the Allah of Charata. Nachamadi says, guys, you're potter. He made a mistake. He made a pesach of a case of noilid that's not common. Now, however, when the sages heard about this, they said, no, it's not true. Whoever took a neder of Naziris before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Nazir, he's a Nazir. In other words, we're not going to permit him with this charata, which is noilid. But let's say a guy only took his neder of Naziris once it was already destroyed, they just didn't know it was destroyed, and they took a neder, then ain't a Nazir. Then he's not going to be a Nazir again, because that was Naziris betoyis. Had he known that it was already destroyed, he would have never taken a neder, and therefore never took at all effect such a neder. That is how the halacha is. But the other way is a problem about noilid. You cannot be pesach b'charata with such a thing. Now, the Gemara points out that Amar Rabbah shutfu rabbanon l'Rebbe Eliezer. It's going to relate back to halacha the Mishnah that the rabbis they flooded Rebbe Eliezer. It's like a euphemistic term. V'ukmei b'shitisahu, and they made him join their opinion. In other words, they overpowered him and they won him over, and he retracted to them, and he also held like them. That what? That the halacha is that you cannot be pesach, you cannot make an opening of noilid that's not common, like the Churban Beis Hamikdash. What's this proof? What does it have to do with our Gemara? What does it have to do with our Mishnah? Because Rebbe Eliezer, it says, Taisus, the historical background, was at the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash. As the Gemara says in Gittin that we read on by Tisha B'Av, Rebbe Eliezer was on one side, Rabbi Shua was on the other side to carry the bed of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, which, like again, to get out of Yerushalayim. And in our halacha of our Mishnah, which is the Rabbanon, saying about the Churban Beis Hamikdash, Rebbe Eliezer didn't speak up. He didn't disagree with the Chachamim to say that no, it was a good charata like Nachum Hamadi. You don't find him saying anything. So therefore, must have been, says Rabbah, that Rebbe Eliezer ended up retracting, because you should have said in that Mishnah that Rebbe Eliezer stood up and he says, no, not true. It is a good Pesach, because you could be Pesach b'noilid. He didn't, so obviously he retracted. It's not like you learn the Mishnah Masechtas in Dagam that they had such a machlokes. The Mishnah says, Paischin b'noilid, the Rebbe Eliezer says, you could make a Pesach b'noilid. The Chacham say, no, you cannot. Obviously, you see that he retracted because he didn't disagree with the Chachmei Hadar that said that this halacha regarding the Churban Beis Hamikdash, he was around at that time. And from not saying anything, you see that he retracted. And he held that you're right, you cannot be Pesach b'noilid. Now, however, Rava says the following important qualification. He says, although the rabbis say in Pesach b'noilid, you cannot make an opening for noilid, but he says interesting, he says, of a Pesach b'tenai noilid. But you can make an opening of a condition of noilid. What does that mean? What does that mean, says the Gemara? So Amar Lahain, they said to them the following thing, meaning the Rav could say to those Nazirim as like this. Ilu asu inish. If a man would have come along, he's going to tell you the Churban Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Me have a nadrisin? Would you have taken a neder of Naziris? In other words, at the time of your neder, had a person come along and he would give you a counsel, and he would say, look, if the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed before you finish your Naziris, would you take a neder? And you say, no, of course I wouldn't. That is similar to charata, because if 10 people would come and appease you, of like we have such a halacha that the Gemara says in the Dam Chavav Beis Mina Darta, which is that it doesn't make a difference why, but the fact is that that's not really noilid, because those people were there. People were there, and they could have told you that. And that's a possibility. That's not a noilid. The Beis Hamikdash being destroyed is noilid. But the people coming along and telling you such a thing is not noilid, and that actually would be a valid way of getting out of it. Therefore, that would be a Pesach, because it's a Tanai noilid, not of the noilid itself. Now, however, the Gemara just makes an interesting comment. Amar Rabbi Yisrael, he says, yeah, boy, Hassan, had I been there at the time when those Nazirim came, I would have told them, as Taisa explains, he's not really disagreeing with anyone or anything. He would have said to those Nazirim, you guys didn't do smartly. You did against the words of the sages that you took a neder, that you guys should have been afraid that the Beis Hamikdash is maybe going to be destroyed. And he wasn't coming to be matter than neder with this Pesach, he's just coming to give them musar. That why didn't they think about the following pasuk that he's going to bring and just not take a neder? But the pasuk is just a simon. He would have told them hoksib, but the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem, Hema. So what do you see from the pasuk is that there's 3 times the word Heichel mentioned, because 2 of them are going to be destroyed, And the third one is going to be Hashem's throne, the great and awesome one, will never be removed forever. But you see, there's going to be three of them. So Zem Mikdash Rishon or Mikdash Sheni. So basically, what Rabbi is saying is that I would have given the Musa. Forget about it, you're right. You can't be Pesach B'Noilid. But why are you taking a net of Naziris? You know the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. You know you're going to be stuck. So says the Gemara, what do you mean? Although they knew the second Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed, do they know when? Like no one's supposed to take a net of Naziris because it's going to happen tomorrow? Amabai says yes. What are you talking about? You think they don't know when the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed? But the pasuk says Daniel. It said they knew when it's going to be destroyed. Shavuim shivim nachascha al amcha va'alir kadshecha. What do you see from there? You see that the Malach said to Daniel, at the end of 70 sevens, which are Shemitah cycles, the second Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Now, when you finish the 70 years of Galus Bavel and the 420 years of the second Beis Hamikdash, that is 70 Shemitahs, which is 7 times 70. So they knew when the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed. So that says the Gemara, but still, you think they knew which day? In other words, in the beginning of the year, or in the middle, or at the end? They thought they'll be able to finish the Naziras and bring the Kabbanis before it's going to be destroyed. So even though they knew when it's going to be destroyed, it's not such musr like Rabbi Yosef thought that what are you guys doing? Taking Ned of Naziras. Now look at the next Mishnah. The Halakha of the Mishnah again continues with the same theme about a suffix Naziris. They're all the same theme about it's a shaky Naziris that you did a Kabbalah. It's not clear if it's Kabbalah or not. So Taisus Gear says, Shisha. We quoted this Mishnah once before, but you had 6 Shisha Yom Halcha Maderech. You had 6 people that were on a journey. And there's one guy coming towards them, and they don't know who this guy is. So one of the 6 people says, Hareini Nazir Shezeh, I'm a Nazir, that this guy that's coming towards us, that he's a man that's Ploini. He's Yemen guy. In other words, I recognize him from a distance. I know it's Reuven, and I'm taking Ned of Naziris if it's true what I'm saying. Okay, that's guy number 1. Ve'echad, guy number 2, he says, Hareini Nazir Shein Zeh Ploini. I'm a Nazir that this is not Yemen guy, because it appears to him that it's not Reuven. So he's taking Ned of Naziris that if it's true like him, that it's not him, then I'll be a Nazir, like how it appears to him. The third guy then tells to the first 2 guys, he says, Hareini Nazir she'echad mechem Nazir. I'm a Nazir that one of you are a Nazir. In other words, that I think that one of you is a Nazir, and not the second one. Meaning, it's going to be like the one who it's true what he's saying. The fourth guy says, I'm a Nazir, she'ein echad mechem Nazir. Now, Taisa explains it's very important. The way you would normally translate she'ein echad mechem Nazir means that neither you are Nazir. Taisa says no. In other words, I think that one of the 2 of you is not a Nazir, meaning echad mechem. One of you 2 is not a Nazir. That is the one that's not like what he's saying. Rather, the one who is saying the right answer, he'll be a Nazir, which Taisa points out, that's the same as the third guy, where he thinks that one of them is a Nazir and one of them is not. They're just saying it in different ways. One guy's saying the one who it is, and one guy's saying the one who's not is not. Now the fifth guy says to the first 2 guys, not to number 3, number 4. The fifth guy says to the first 2 guys, I'm a Nazir, sheshnechem Nazirim, that both of you are Nazir. In other words, because since each one was makabel himself and Nazir is according to what he thinks is the truth, so each one thinks he's saying the truth. Therefore, you're going to become a Nazir. And therefore, I think that both of you are going to be a Nazir. And then the 6th guy says, I'm a Nazir, shekulchem Nazirim, that all 5 of you are a Nazir. So I think that you're all Nazir, and then therefore I'll be a Nazir. That's the case. What's the halacha? Beis Shammai oimrim kulam Nazirim. Beis Shammai says they're all Nazirim. Why? Because Beis Shammai holds Naziris b'to'os is a Nazir. Because they're all intending to become Nazirim. They're all very confident in what they're saying. And even though it turns out that you're making a mistake, but still, when he thinks it's that guy, so he thinks that he's right. And actually, from here is where the Gemara proves, from this Mishnah, that Hektish B'tois is a Hektish according to Beis Shammai, because you see that he holds Nazir B'tois is a Nazir. You're going to become a Nazir, even though you're mistaken, but you think you're right. B'silam, they say no. Ein a Nazir el Mishlei Niskayim Devarav. The only one that's becoming a Nazir is the one who, it's not like what he's saying, which Gemara is going to ask, you're saying it the wrong way. It's not someone that's loy niskayim devarav, it's the guy who's niskayim devarav, the guy who's correct. The Gemara is going to explain exactly what do the words of Beis Hillel mean. Now, Reb Tarfon, he says actually, ein echad behem Nazir. He says, no, nobody's becoming a Nazir. Why not? The guy who's right should be a Nazir. No. The halach of Naziris is only said when you are clearly, distinctively expressing what you are taking a neder on. Because by Nazir it says ishki yafli. Yafli means it has to be clearly defined. So therefore, no one here has a Kabbalas of Naziris. Because even the one of the first two guys that it turns out what he said was correct, he didn't know definitively when he took the neder that he's going to be a Nazir until the guy comes close and they recognize him. Now, since it wasn't clear at that moment, so therefore that's not conclusively going to make him a Nazir. Now, the third guy who says that if one of you are Nazir, that means to say that, however, the other one is not a Nazir. First of all, he says that if one of you are Nazir, well, we said none of them are Nazir according to Reb Tarfon. The fourth guy also, who he says that Ein echem echem Nazir, Tosfos already explained, that sounds like, okay, I'm a Nazir if one of you is not a Nazir. But the inference is that, however, the other guy is a Nazir. But that's not the case, because from the first two guys, neither one is a Nazir, because it's only taken by flaw, so he's also not becoming a Nazir. Because Tosfos says, yes, if the fourth guy would say the first two guys, I'm a Nazir that neither one of you is a Nazir, then you're right, the fourth guy would be a Nazir. Because according to Reb Tarfon, neither one of the first two are going to be a Nazir. And that would be, then the fourth guy would be taking a neder of hafla. And that's actually why the Gemara doesn't say other cases of that another guy says that to the first two guys, neither you are Nazir or all you are not Nazir. Because if you would say that, according to Reb Tarfon, actually you would be a Nazir. Because according to the truth, you're right, neither one, not the first two, not all of them, they're not Nazirim. So obviously, when we're saying the fourth guy is that she'ein echad mikhem Nazir. One of you is not a Nazir. The inference is, but one of you is a Nazir. He's not going to be Nazir either because it's not true. From the first two, neither one is a Nazir. Now, Reb Shimon Omer, he says, first the Mishnah says hitiu la'chayrev. Now, what happens is, let's say this guy, they never end up finding out who he is because he backs out. He's coming towards them and he backs out. He goes through some other alleyway. So it says the Mishnah ain't a Nazir. Now, neither one of the first two guys is going to be a Nazir, because even though it's obviously one of the two is correct, because either is Reuben or is not, but still, since it was never verified to us who was correct, neither one is a Nazir. Now, the Gemara is going to explain that this teaching is going according to Yehuda, who he says what's called leimochas inish nafshel esfekim. Even if a guy takes a neder of Naziris, but he's not going to do it in a situation where he's going to be left in a situation of doubt, as the Gemara will explain. So you're not going to be a Nazir. Reb Shimon, he says, no, the guy should say, both of them, if it was, I was correct, like my words, I'm the obligatory Nazir. I'm taking the Naziris of the Dava, because Reb Shimon goes according to his reasoning that actually Safek Naziris we go lahachmer, and each one is going to be a Nazir misafek, and therefore you're going to be forbidden in wine and tuma. And the problem is, you can't do the hair cutting because of a Safek Naziris without bringing a carbon. The problem is you can't bring a carbon because maybe we're not a Nazir, you can bring Chulun Lazara. So therefore we make the guy, each one of them say, look, if it's like me, like what I said, I was correct, it was Reuben or not Reuben, whichever one I am, so I'm a Nazir Chayva. If not, I'll bring a Nazir Nedava. Okay, now they each take a Kabbalah of Naziris, and you bring a carbon, and then you're Yichiv Mamanav Shach, and you're going to be Osir and Yain Teklach in that interim period. Now, Tais just explains that these Tanoim, Yehuda and Reb Shimon, they're disagreeing in the opinion of Beis Hillel. Yehuda holds that even though Beis Hillel holds that whoever's words were fulfilled, he's going to be a Nazir, as the Gemara explains, that's only when he ended up finding out who's the right one. But over here, where the guy backs out, and you don't end up finding out whose words were fulfilled, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person would not put himself in a situation of Safek of Naziris. Rabbi Shimon holds that, no, according to Beis Hillel, Misreka, you would put yourself in a situation of Naziris, because since it's clear like it's one of them, and therefore you have to have this tonight, and you're going to have to fulfill it, mitzad the Safek, each one of them, and you just say, if it's chayv, if not, it's going to be Nadav. Thank you to any time.